previous episode signaled something about this show you may or may not have realized. I'm running out of ideas. You also may or may not have noticed that it follows a pattern of 3 Nintendo games and 1 not Nintendo game. It was an accident at first, but I ended up being all OCD about it.
1, 2, 3.
The reason I feature a lot of Nintendo games is because despite how good they are, they've been around for so long that they've settled into certain conventions, many of which they established. So there's a lot of unexplored territory, room for modernization, and lapses in direction. And I wanted to stop at 25 episodes because, you know.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Which means I would have only had one more round after this one, but I honestly don't know if I can flesh out the bill anymore. I might have to pull the plug a little early, so this might be the final
Call me that. What's your name?
Nintendo has over 50 franchises, and then there's countless not Nintendo ones. Most of these I cannot do for several reasons. Many I never played and therefore don't have an opinion. Some I just can't think of ideas for. Some I refuse to think of ideas for because they're too sacred to me to influence their creative process. Some that I like exactly how they are and wouldn't change a thing. And some that I've made peace with ending. So I really had to scrape the bottom of the DK barrel to find an idea for an episode. I can't do the RPG stuff because I can't fucking do RPG stuff. I barely had enough for F-Zero. I have even less for their sport skin tech demos. And as interesting as it seems, I feel like if I ever played Chibi Robo, I would somehow regain my virginity. What am I gonna do? Nintendo Cats?
Holy shit, it's real.
Punch-Out 3?
Holy shit, so is that.
The long-awaited comeback of Game & Watch or Duck Hunt or Ice Climbers? It turns out the brightest light I found was since Nintendo co-owns Fatal Frame with Tecmo, please do an HD remaster of the original trilogy and localize the 4th game and port the 5th game and make a 6th game. Oh my god. But that series would never merit a worthwhile episode because I would never change anything about it. And then it hit me that I can't think of ideas for these franchises because they've been so underutilized. I don't really have a jumping off point. Barely enough to even be a fan in the first place. They were all fresh new properties that either didn't sell well or were exhausted of all creative possibilities and locked in the vault. But then, an idea came to me. A different approach. Of all Nintendo's bottom shelf IPs, which one deserves to be resurrected? Which one seems to harbor the most potential? Which one is Kid Icarus? It's Kid Icarus.
Let the man do his...
Let me do my thing. You're jumping on my thing here.
Kid Icarus came out around '87 for the NES by the same Gunpei Yokoi division that made Metroid.
This game universe and that game universe have nothing to do with each other.
It was an action platformer with RPG elements and a premise inspired by ancient Greek mythology. The sequel came out for Game Boy a few years later, and that's it. We can only wonder what Super Kid Icarus would have been like, but mixed reception and poor sales meant the market had spoken. Kid Icarus flew too close to the sun, and the series was axed.
17!
Years later.
Listen well, all you demons of the underworld! In the name of the goddess Palutena, the defender of all that is good!
Thank you so much.
Made to face the light!
Pit was given a new lease on life as a Smash fighter. And a pretty unique one at that. 4 years later, the great Sakurai continued to explore his interest in the Forgotten series by directing its first game in 22 years. Kid Icarus Uprising was... a rail shooter? A rail shooter. Why? I mean, I still loved it, but why? I mean, great personality, hilarious writing, brilliant music, various features, garbage controls. And that was 8 years ago. Since then, only darkness, by which I mean this. So, why Kid Icarus? Well, kids, even though the Dope Man is something of an atheist, even he can admit that Greek mythology is pretty interesting. Honestly, the same goes for most religious texts. It's only when people take them as non-fiction and kill each other over their favorite fan theories that I tend to drop out of society. But in and of themselves, they're awesome, with the true meaning of the word awe. They're epic parabolic stories rich in symbolism and imagery meant to impart a moral lesson. And what I like about the Greek gods is that they're full of personality, and those personalities are full of flaws. They're not perfect. In fact, they're a bunch of nefarious horn dogs. They fuck each other, and then they fuck each other. The Greek myths are like the Seinfeld of religion. Or is it the Sunny?
The Golden God!
So that's why Kid Icarus. Ancient Greece is a super cool subject to build a game around. The mythos, the philosophers, the artists, the architecture, the geography, the everything. And Nintendo does not stay fully loyal to the source material. It's basically their own Japanese twist on Greek folklore, much like how Zelda is a Japanese twist on English folklore. It's centered around the conflicts between Palutena and Medusa, goddess of light versus goddess of darkness, good versus evil, blah versus blah, and Pit, the protagonist, is Palutena's right-hand man, her first mate, her Metatron. And very little of the actual story of Icarus is presented in the series. The first game's plot was actually a combination of the story of Perseus and the Divine Comedy, which is actually Italian folklore. Palutena is captured by Medusa, so she summons Pit, who was taken prisoner in the underworld. He escapes through vertically scrolling levels, runs across the earth in horizontal levels, and vertically ascends to the heavens. Pretty clever level design. I would say that since it's a pretty original idea, and it is the original game, it's worthy of a remake, but the 3D Classics touch-up makes me question the likelihood. The sequel could use a remake as much as the next Game Boy title, but It takes place after the first events. Palutena has a dream about a future invasion and sends Pit through a training program that completely mirrors the trials in the first game.
That was pointless.
The final battle is the invasion she dreamt about. Pit wins and then flies up to the sun and loses his wings, which is a reference to the story of Icarus, but there's no context for it. Icarus is about a guy with fake wings made of wax who was told not to fly too high or the sun would melt the wax, and he drowned in the sea. It's a story about hubris that sparked the phrase "don't fly too close to the sun," and basically means that too much pride, quite literally, goeth before a fall. But I don't see how that plays into the game's plot. It just seemed kind of forced and tacked on at the end for the sake of some false sense of authenticity. And then Uprising took these 20-year-old sprites and added unprecedented layers of depth and charm and attitude, mostly through informative and humorous and even thought-provoking dialogue that I could only enjoy fleetingly due to the frenzied gameplay. And it wrapped them up in a twisting plot with a satisfying mix of old and new. But why use the Zelda font when you could have used the Greek alphabet?
I have another idea.
So, what do I want? What does the dope man want to see? What's my idea for a reboot? Like a series reboot.
Slow down.
Yeah. Let us. Yeah.
People, let me paint you a picture. With an accompanying checklist. They can stuff the entire pantheon of Greek mythos into one game and just fucking slather it with their own Eastern interpretation and Nintendo flair like a thick coat of tzatziki sauce. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, Hesiod's Theogony, the ancient creation legends of the primordials and the Titans can compose the backstory and the lore. The main game could be about the story of Icarus being intertwined around the major stories of the Olympians and the Greek heroes, and the minor stories could be side quests. I seriously love the idea of Pit appearing in all the Greek myths throughout the game, kinda like how Forrest Gump just wandered through the 20th century. And actually, it doesn't have to be a reboot, since I really enjoyed the self-referential continuity in Uprising, but what I really want is like a Zelda-style open-world adventure. Wow, is that really my idea every time?
Hades! Hades! Hades!
SpongeBob.
This game would be awesome. It has action, platforming, puzzles, exploration, role-playing elements. It has that killer ensemble with all that hilarious and witty dialogue. Skyworld and Angel Land emulates Mount Olympus and the Heaven. The overworld has locations like Athens and the Aegean Sea. The underworld has domains like Elysium and the River Styx. The bow could be crafted and customized and upgraded. And what if Pit, like Icarus, couldn't fly too high or too low and had to maintain a level altitude.
Then what's the point of doing anything?
Smartass with me.
I'm just spitballing ideas here, but do you now see the potential I see for this series? They don't have to reignite the IP into their next big franchise. Just one solid game would be awesome. Listen up, mortals. I don't know if I believe in God, but what I do believe in is Nintendo's ability to make a great game about something I don't believe in. However, being a Nintendo fan my whole life, I also believe in their tendency to left field us with something else, whether we want it or not. People, don't pray for this to happen. Thoughts and prayers will get us nowheres. If anything, pray to Nintendo. Specifically on Twitter. Tell them you want a big, badass Kid Icarus reboot. Tell them I want it. Because f*** Twitter, I don't do that shit. And tell them to call it Kid Icarus Palutena's...
A bird with no tits and no ass.
That was it.